back, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well, Will. Thank you.
And this week we have with us Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, who is a Democrat representing Virginia's 7th Congressional District since 2019. She is a mom, a tireless advocate for Virginia, former CIA case officer, and as of the time of this recording, probably has as good of a chance to become Speaker of the House as does the other 221 Republicans in Congress. So welcome to the show, Congresswoman.
Yes.
Maybe better than two at this point.
Better than a few, that's for sure.
So just to start us off, I asked this question of every single congressperson we have on the show, and I have to ask you the same. So you represent the 7th District. What is your favorite place to eat in your district?
Well, in politics, this is a pretty contentious question, I would imagine. But I'm going to have to admit to a favorite. In Orange County, there's a barbecue place called Barbecue Exchange. It is amazing. And there's not a time when anyone from my campaign teams over the years or my congressional team sets foot in the county of Orange without finding a reason
to get over there, huh?
To stop there. And in fact, there's been at least one occasion where on a long campaign day, I have maybe gotten the family style to go to bring home to my my lovely husband and kids, because it is just that good.
Okay. That's all great. Right. Well, if there ever was an endorsement of a place to eat, I think that qualifies. So
that does.
Okay. So tell us about why you got into politics. So you've been in since 2019. You've had a pretty long and, I don't know, like honorable career in the CIA. So like, why politics?
So I would begin by saying that politics was pretty unexpected for me, at least in the years before I got involved. I had always been devoted to service to country. My father had been a career federal agent. My mother was a nurse. And so growing up, it was always, service to others, service to country, service to community. And I always dreamed of being a CIA officer. So I began my career following directly in my dad's footsteps as a federal agent. And then from there, went to CIA. It was an extraordinary adventure. I loved the job. But ultimately, there was kind of a pull to not move every 2 years. By that point, Adam and I had our 3 daughters. And I thought, if ever there's a time to pivot, away from service to country towards service to community, this is it. And so back in 2014, we moved home to Virginia. The kind of short story of it that really started it in my mind was we were talking about where we're going to bid next. That's with the CIA and other similar positions. You bid on different locations. And so we were talking with our oldest daughter about where we might bid, this exotic place, that exotic place. And she said, well, what about Virginia? And we said, no, that's not going to happen. And she just said, but everybody we love lives in Virginia. Why wouldn't we go to Virginia? And it was kind of a pithy comment of a child, but it really, it set in. And over time, it was like those sort of, earworm songs where I thought, well, she has a really good point. And so
Yes.
We decided to kind of really take a huge leap, which was we would move back to Virginia. I'd leave CIA, and kind of figure out what came next. And what came next is I got a job in the private sector, and I started a Girl Scout troop, and I was a volunteer on a variety of things that mattered. But my whole background, my whole time at CIA, like I had all these interesting adventures for the sole purpose of ensuring that somebody somewhere could make a good decision based on really good intelligence, whether that's military officials at the Pentagon or, State Department folks in negotiations or members of Congress and the president. And of course, there's like no higher level of excitement than if intel you collect ends up in the presidential daily brief.
Absolutely.
And so, then I initially got involved in politics more on advocacy related to gun violence prevention. And from there, I realized that sometimes politics is highly reductive and not a lot of informed decision making in the way that, as a collector of intelligence, I wanted to believe it was. And so there were a couple occasions where, my predecessor, I think, was out of step with what I thought was the right thing to do or the right place to be politically or from a policy standpoint, actually. And so I thought, I can either think that things should be different or I can try and make them different. And that's really what drew me to politics. And the first time was I heard my predecessor talking about something in the national security space, and I thought, oh my goodness, like, that's wrong. And that was really the first time that I had one of those, wait, I think I might, I had a level of reverence for people in elected office and a level of kind of, it's a different role. And then I thought, I actually know about this topic, and I think I could do a better job in this space. And then I started saying, well, in fact, maybe I could do this differently in a way that, maybe people shouldn't feel that level of sort of reverence. Maybe they should just be normal people who care a lot and spend a lot more time, reading and digging into deep policy issues. And so that's how I got into politics. And then I really love it. I love the job of representing people.
That's so cool.
Love the job of digging into tough things. And
yeah.
And so here I am.
That's so cool. And I love that attitude that you have about digging in to difficult issues. I know that that's such an important attitude to have. And it seems like the generations these days, how when your dad was older and you swore you'd never talk about the younger generations like he did, and then now it's all I can do. I'm like, these people are crazy. What is wrong with them? They don't even know how to work. They don't know how to put in a hard anyway. But yeah, I really appreciate that about you, though. So I got to tell you one thing before I start. So speaking of dads, and my dad, which I won't name his name, but it wouldn't be that hard to find out for people that wanted to. But he said that you, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, are the first Democrat he's ever voted for in his entire life.
Wow.
Which is saying something. He's like 75. So
and I'll say this, like, that's a tremendous responsibility, because it's beyond politics, right? It means that for whatever reason, and boy, I would love to know all the reasons, for whatever reason, somebody's willing to set their identity, and many people do have their political partisan affiliation as an identity, to set it aside for a particular race, for a particular candidate. And I think that, I feel a tremendous sense of responsibility to everybody I represent.
Yeah.
But, there's a bunch of folks who, when they go into the polling booth, they're going to vote for the Democrat or they're going to vote for the Republican. But
of course,
when someone's willing to take a chance on you, I think that's an extraordinary, honor. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing, dude. I'm amazed. I didn't get a chance to vote for you because I think they took you out of my district or something happened, and redistricting or something. It's always redistricting here in Virginia.
Redistricting.
It's always redistricting.
And gain some folks.
Well, cool. So in that though, it had to be an amazing feeling, huh? To be the first Democrat to be able to come in and get this seat after 38 years. Is that right? 38 years it was held by a Republican?
It was actually, some of the entries are wrong. It's actually 1968 was the last time there was a Democrat elected.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think one of them is wrong. But if you go to various different places, but 68 is the last time the 7th District of Virginia elected a Democrat.
That is unbelievable, man. So, I mean, hey, what that just shows you is the nature of American politics, right? That there's very deeply entrenched ideas and ideologies and all that stuff, which, that's just the waters we swim in now. What do you imagine? It seemed like midterm 2018, we had this kind of, there was this pattern almost where we've had several upsets, if you could call them that, like yours, that happened in 2018. these movements that people didn't predict.
Yeah.
What do you imagine coming up into 2024? Do you sense the same kind of sentiment? Are the conditions right for that to happen again? Or do you sense something else stirring?
A little bit of all of the above, actually. I think 2018 was interesting because, you know, it certainly as a Democrat elected in an area that hadn't elected a Democrat in quite some time. I think the 2016 election, you know, for happy Democrats who, you know, maybe they didn't love George W. Bush, and then they're all excited because, you know, we've got 8 years with Obama. And I think there was a sense that, okay, and, you know, now we're going to have Hillary Clinton as president, right? Like there's maybe it's overconfidence, maybe it was complacency, maybe it was like being in a bit of an echo chamber. I think it also was the polling that was on television telling everybody where everything was going. So I think that for a lot of people, there was this jolt of how did this happen? You know, and it wasn't a George W. Bush Republican who got elected, right? It was somebody who's a major departure, a very different candidate, and you know, for many people, a deeply unacceptable potential candidate. And for folks, you know, who are used to the traditional back and forth between kind of traditional Democrats and traditional Republicans, like all of a sudden the world's kind of topsy-turvy. And so I think that in 2018, there was this big surge of people who thought, it's variations on a theme. You're right. We've got Republicans, we've got Democrats. They're different. I'm typically this or I'm typically that. And so I think that just as you saw a big shift with some of the Democrats who ran in 2018, many of whom hadn't been in elected office, the majority of the folks I was elected to Congress with in 2018 on the Democratic side of the aisle had never been in elected office. We had one or two who had come from state houses, but the flip seats predominantly, they were all folks who had been involved in their communities or in public service in a whole host of ways, but didn't ever perceive politics to be their route. And so I think that in 2024, there's an element of, are we still having some of these conversations about what's acceptable in politics? Are we still in a place where, you know, there's an uneasiness after, you know, January 6th, after all of these things that just have really heightened the temperature, so to speak? I mean, what I hear across the board is people are just really tired. You know, there's some people who really, I won't even say they love the vitriol, who've been taken in by it. But I think for the average person, they don't want politics to be, you know, binary. They don't want to be fighting at Thanksgiving with family members, right? Like they want to go back to the ribbing someone, you know, like the old show. Now, you mentioned us being old, so now I'll say like family ties.
It was me being old. Me being old.
But like the old 80s show where it was like the mom and dad were like, you know, Alex P. Keaton, right? Where it's like sort of ribbing each other over politics.
Yes.
And the theatrics of it and the drama of it and the anger, I think is, you know, but the challenge with that is, in order to get past that, the people who are tired of that, who don't want it anymore, have to not turn away. And so, you know, I hear a few too many people say, oh, I'm just done with politics. I'm done. And that's not helpful, because if, you know, people who are you know, regular people with family and kids and other things that they care about, and they want, you know, their politicians to have good manners like they teach their kids, and they want us to debate and then just solve the problems and stop being so dramatic, right? Like, if those people turn away, who
do we have left?
Who do you have left? And the people who like the theatrics or like the anger, or at least are taken in by it, who are they voting for? And so it's the incentives at times are really messed up.
Yeah, you know, so I'm curious, and this is my only question about the speaker race. But so we've been without a speaker for like 20 days.
Yeah.
The CR is going to expire like November 17th, which is like 25 days or something like that. I did the math, and actually, the math works out that the Republicans could vote for 9 candidates every single day up until November 17th and get all 221. I hope that doesn't come to that, but I'm curious, like what what types of conversations are Democrats having with Republicans? And obviously I understand maybe some of those conversations may be privileged, so you can't talk too much, but from the outside looking in, we see this kind of as a Republican bit of chaos, yet like, I don't know, like Democrats could do something, get concessions, whatever, but so what are some things happening behind the scenes that can give the American people a better sense that our Congress isn't broken?
Yeah. And I think this is the kind of most challenging bit of all of this, is that in an effort to try and fix it, there are conversations happening all over the place. And in an effort to try and get those conversations to be meaningful and actually bear fruit, they're predominantly private. So I'll give 2 very sort of public references, and then I'll answer your question a bit more directly. So 2 weeks ago, Speaker, Freudian slip, Leader Hakeem Jeffries, wishful thinking, willing it into existence.
Yes.
Hakeem Jeffries, who's the Democratic leader, put an op-ed in the Washington Post, basically outlining in very, very broad terms what it would look like for Democrats and Republicans to come together in some sort of bipartisan coalition, making very general references to rules changes, general references to how bills get to the floor, and not to be wishy-washy on it, but really to not be prescriptive, but to basically outline everything is on the table. And here's where I'll note that before the speaker vote, when we vacated McCarthy from the chair, the number of conversations at all levels, and I was part of multiple conversations of saying, we can make this place work better. And the way that happens is by rejecting the extreme voices, right? 10 extreme voices on the right, and ushering in a little bit more bipartisanship. Like, that's how we change the rule, get rid of this motion to vacate with 1 vote. Like, by defanging this extreme, that's how we have to move forward. Like, we are here for it. Let's have a conversation. And I think, former Speaker McCarthy was very clear that he didn't want to have that conversation. And so then I referenced the op-ed from Hakeem. There's also a public letter that a number of Democrats put out explaining some of the changes that we could make and allowing for, right now we have temporary speaker, McHenry, but he doesn't have any authority to bring bills to the floor under the current rules. So a number of Democrats said, how about we expand the authority of the temporary speaker in a minimal way? So not kind of upending what is the tradition of how we elect a speaker, but to allow us to get through this time of this emergency time, fund the government, do the must pass legislation, be it the Farm Bill, be it FAA reauthorization, be it aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel, humanitarian aid, those sorts of things. But all those bills have to be bipartisan, right? And so those are the very sort of public out there putting discussions into the bloodstream. And then what's happening kind of behind the scenes is a whole host of us, myself included, who have strong relationships with Republicans, have been having when's the time going to be right? Right. And what I know to be true is that, unfortunately, there are a lot of my Republican colleagues who exist in an ecosystem where working with Democrats is considered to be a bad thing. And I actually had, and you gotta find places where you can laugh occasionally. I actually had a conversation with one of them where I said, I have to tell you, I go home all the time and talk about bipartisanship, and I work with so-and-so, and I work with so-and-so, and I'm so bipartisan, blah, blah, blah. I said, I always just thought all of you were doing that too. Is that not true? Are you not going home and name checking me because I'm name checking you? And he said, no, a lot of people, even when their bills are bipartisan and signed into law by a Democratic president, so clearly bipartisan, it's different. And so I'm not saying that, certainly many people work in a bipartisan manner. That's how you get legislation across the finish line. but it's been, even for me, a bit of a learning experience and a realization of how many people don't necessarily lean into that when they're back home, which then makes it difficult to be in a position where they might say, yes, Democrats and Republicans joined together to elect, very blatantly, frankly speaking, a Republican speaker, right? Mm-hmm. The math makes it easy. If 5 Republicans voted for Hakeem Jeffries, he'd be speaker, we'd be done. But we have no expectation that, even though it's a small majority, the Republicans are in the majority. And so the expectation is we'll have a Republican speaker. And so, I think, the conversations we're having is, how can we make this place function? We're going to have a Republican speaker.
Yeah.
News alert, we plan on getting the majority in 2024, and then we'll have a Democratic speaker. So our turn is coming. We got to earn it through elections.
There you go.
But how can we use this as a time of reset? And I think that if we take this moment as a potential time of reset, Republicans are Republicans, Democrats are Democrats, right? It's a 2-party system. I'm not saying it should be sort of all we change upend the whole circumstance, but don't we want to get bills to the president's desk? Mm-hmm. And maybe those bills skew a little more, along the lines of what a Republican would want versus a Democrat, whatever that actually means. But that's the nature of the beast, right? But I want to govern. And so all that to say is conversations are ongoing. We had to get through some of the hijinks of last week, and certainly the poll and the pressure campaign that existed on the kind of further to the right spectrum with Jim Jordan's speakership campaign. But we saw quite a few Republican members who are focused on governing who said this candidate is not the candidate to govern the House of Representatives. And so I think that we'll have a bumpy couple days. But when we get to a point where it's clear that nobody can get to 17, my expectation, and I am never losing this optimism because it's my belief in our country, is that all of a sudden we'll have this rocky moment and more than enough people will say, okay, the 10 to 20 on the right, or, more, who are just never going to work with Democrats. Sorry, guys. We're going to find some common ground, and we're going to pass some bills that need to get passed to do the things that we were sent to Washington to do.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably do it in that sort of temporary speaker expanded powers, because I think it's a good way to dip our toe in the water and demonstrate that, frankly, there's a vacuum of trust at times kind of between the parties and between some members.
Absolutely.
And so to be able to say, let's just try this, and, we'll trust you and you'll trust us, and we'll go from there. So I'm knocking on wood. But I will say I was talking to a Republican colleague last week who's new to Congress. And so I don't have a very strong relationship with him. But we've had a lot of earnest conversations over the past couple of days. And he was kind of lamenting some of the problems and ups and downs on his side of the aisle. And I just said, the truth is the American people deserve better than this. And I felt a little bit like a little bit of the mom. And he looked at me and, and he said, yeah, they do. And then I really felt like a mom, because he did have this sort of I did my disappointed mom face.
Did you wag your finger? You're like,
I didn't. Maybe
these Republicans need to get their act together.
Come on, gentlemen.
Exactly. So that's fascinating. So in the Congress, this is kind of like I have a somewhat not serious question and then a more serious one. So in Congress, when someone is backing things up, does everyone just get super annoyed and start talking behind their back and be like, oh man, that Matt Gaetz, man, that Spanberger, what's wrong with them? What are they doing? Why can't they get, what do you guys do? Do you just
well, when it's Matt Gaetz,
what's with these people
on television in case.
Oh, that's funny, man. It's kind of like who's the, it's this is your high school class. And then there's certain people that are just ridiculous and certain people that are Yeah, they're pretty cool.
It is a little bit, I feel guilty saying this because the American people should believe in the Congress that it elected to do its business. But the reality is that there is very much an element of high school. And even, we've got caucuses, which are essentially like after school clubs, right? I'm in this caucus and that caucus, and we focus on this.
Which caucus are you in?
Oh, I'm in so many caucuses. I'm in the New Dems caucus. I'm in the Women's caucus. And then, everything from, then we've got a whole, like I'm in the Animal Protection Caucus and the Substance Use Disorder Prevention Caucus. We got a bunch. And some are
nice.
And then on the Republican side, I think they have six or five. They call them the five families. So everybody's always sort of bumping up against those. Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe we should just all get T-shirts made and do a field day and little tug of war. And you and Matt Gaetz will have to go and figure out how to do a ropes course or something like that, and you'll have to work together to get it done.
Yeah, team building.
It's interesting because he's received the ire of a bunch of people, but I've actually worked with him. We've written a joint op-ed together in the past.
Nice.
Because he is really good on authorization of use of military force issues. So AUMF. We've got the 2001 AUMF still on the books, the 1956, the 1991, and then the 2002. And so he and I have worked together trying to, get the old ones off the books that are no longer in use, just so that they're not hanging out there. And then an effort to, update and revise the 2001. And so we wrote a joint op-ed together. We've co-sponsored legislation together on that front. And that's kind of the start and finish of the places where we've cooperated, but where you're good on issues, you're good on issues.
Yes, I totally hear you on that. So when we get back, when we actually get a Speaker of the House, what do you imagine is priority in terms of like legislation? What do we need to get through for the American people?
So the continuing resolution, as Will mentioned, expires currently on November 17th. So, and funding the government is certainly not just important for the American people, but it is monumentally important for Virginia. If we even risk a shutdown, it impacts our economy. And Virginia is the most impacted state when there have been government shutdowns. So funding the government, the reality looking at the calendar is that there is not a trajectory to get all 12 individual appropriations bills through the House, through the Senate, to the president's desk. So speaking, from a realistic standpoint, we need to do another continuing resolution because unfortunately we did one at the end of September, and now we've spent the month of October dealing with the speaker issue and not doing the government funding bills. So priority number one has to be funding the government to a date certain, and then going after all of those appropriations bills. The Farm Bill, so this is a piece of legislation done every 5 years. The 2023 Farm Bill needs to get done in 2023, and this is vitally important to Virginia crop and livestock producers. I'm the only Virginian on the Ag Committee, and we've been, preparing for 2023 Farm Bill since I first got to Congress. And so this bill needs to move. The FAA authorization needs to get to the president's desk before the end of the year. And then as we do those appropriations bills, either as individuals or put together in minibuses or omnibuses, we need to ultimately fund the government for FY24. And there's a couple other kind of must-pass things along the way, but those are the big elements that, if we don't pass those within the next, before the end of the year, we have created monumental problems. And one more I would mention is the National Defense Authorization Act. That's an annual piece of legislation authorizing elements of our national defense. And that's an example. That bill passed out of committee with, I think it was 52 or 53 to 1. So the entire committee, Democrats, Republicans, worked hard. It's under the Armed Services Committee, worked hard to push a bill out of the committee process. One person disagreed with it. That's his prerogative. But it speaks to the fact that when things go through committee, when people who are really dug in on issues are the ones working on those bills, the solutions and the path forward can be highly, highly agreeable to a broad brush of people.
Whenever I talk to folks on the other side of the aisle, with the exception of Josh, because Josh actually doesn't follow politics very closely. Theology, he's a master, right? But like politics, he's like, what? Trump's not in office anymore. But like whenever I talk to Republicans about Democrats, I always say I think that there's more that we actually agree upon than we disagree. And one of the things, one of the questions I like to throw to them is, do you think Congress members should be able to trade stocks? And they're like, oh, no, of course not. Of course not. And I know that you've been pushing for the Trust in Congress Act for some time. So I'd love for you to maybe, one, explain a little bit about what that is, and two, like what types of opposition are you getting from it, if you feel comfortable talking about it. Sure. And like what is the future of that particular bill?
So I will begin by saying, not only is support for this bill bipartisan, totally bipartisan, but opposition to this bill is totally bipartisan. And the way that this bill came about is there's a Republican member of Congress from Texas named Chip Roy. And he went to UVA, spent some time in Virginia, and we have the same birthday. And so we both came into Congress in January 2019. We were sworn in. UVA basketball was doing really well. He's wearing a UVA tie, like your tie, like basketball, right? Both UVA grads, same birthday, oddly enough. And so, we decided that was enough to start a friendship. And so we would periodically talk about what are some things that we really agree on or don't agree on. And, and the answer is Chip's in a very different place. He's been in the news on a variety of different times for being in, a very different place politically than I am. But in the early days of COVID, when there were all those news reports about, so-and-so's trading this stock and buying this stock and, and it's Clorox and it's pharmaceuticals and it's things that for even a layperson clearly seems linked to COVID, we were having a conversation on the floor of the House about just how ridiculous this is. We're dealing with emergency after emergency in our districts, right? We've got nursing homes where people are dying and loved ones can't get in. So I'm getting constituent calls from people who are just reeked with worry and sadness. I'm talking to hospitals that can't get PPE, right? All of these things. People are suddenly laid off and the unemployment system's overwhelmed, et cetera, et cetera. And somebody's buying and selling stocks, right? And so we had this conversation where we both expressed this kind of shared sense of like, you have to be kidding me. And also this is what's wrong with politics, because good on the media for reporting on these things, but every time it's reported on, there's somebody somewhere that's like, yep, that's it. Yep, look at that. They're making money off of this and they're making money off of that. And so Chip and I got to talking about it and said, the reality is we take votes all the time that move markets. We meet with CEOs all the time because it's actually relevant to my job. And they speak very openly with us. But the only reason I have that meeting is because I'm in Congress. And the only reason I have that meeting is it's supposed to help me make informed decisions about issues in a particular industry. But as we're having these open conversations, like I'm getting far more information. And, insider trading, to be clear, insider trading is illegal, but I'm getting way more access to trends and feelings and vibes and all the things than than any of the people that I represent. And then right. With our votes, between the Farm Bill or the NDAA, like there's major investments in certain technologies, right? The CHIPS Act that we passed, bipartisan bill, phenomenally important for America's ability to become less dependent on China and Taiwan for semiconductors, but clearly going to be a major driver and of benefit to, particular industries and maybe even companies. And so we said, this is pretty straightforward. It doesn't necessarily even matter if people are doing this with a negative intent. If someone's leaving that meeting with the CEO and saying, okay, you know what, I'm going to go buy this stock or sell this stock. or they're thinking that through when they vote on a particular bill. The fact that it even has the perception of impropriety is enough to degrade the trust that the American people have in us. And, I come from a background at CIA. I used to get strapped up to a polygraph all the time. I had like all of these provisions and restrictions on my life because of the trust that was granted to me by the United States government. And so in reality, Chip and I said, there's no reason that you should even buy and sell individual stocks. Save for your retirement in a 401k, sure. Diversified mutual funds, sure. But who's got time to buy and sell individual stocks? So that's the genesis of the legislation. And then we quickly found out that a lot of people hate it and a lot of people love it. And, but we continue to make progress on it. I think it's also, I don't want to say it's a generational thing, but I will say that people who have been in Congress for a long time, I've had conversations where my colleagues are saying, you're saying that we're corrupt, right? And they're actually earnestly offended by the principle of the legislation, right? And some of these folks don't actually have any stock holdings. They wouldn't be impacted at all, but they think that I'm making Congress look bad. And it's been interesting along the way because I've said, Congress already looks bad. People are already unhappy with us.
You don't need a lot of help to do that, I don't think right now.
This is actually us being able to say, you know what? We're not doing anything wrong. If you want to say that, we're not doing anything wrong. But we want to remove even the doubt that you have that we're doing something wrong, right? And, I'm the oldest of 3 girls. And when I was younger, and, I always had very strong opinions about all the things my sisters should be doing, which of course I was always very, very helpful.
Of course.
And
no sarcasm, right?
But my mother used to say, and I remember very vividly, that their perception, right, when I'd get in trouble for whatever I was doing, their perception is their reality. And so the bottom line is, if constituents are like, ugh, we're done, like they're corrupt, they don't care, etc., that creates a reality that now we have a responsibility to try and disrupt. And, I certainly don't think banning members of Congress from buying or selling individual stocks is going to, all of a sudden give us a soaring approval rate as an institution. But I do think that it's an affirmative action that one can take to say, we hear you, and here's a little way that I can endeavor to show you that I am not only trustworthy, but trying to be worthy of your trust and recognizing the areas where there might be places where you have doubt.
That's really, really good. It seems like a very common sense legislation to me, and I hope that there can be some more progress along those lines. I want to shift just a little bit. Well, actually, it's a fairly significant shift, I guess, but it's still political, right? Ukraine and Russia. Biden says that we're going to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But what does this mean exactly? And I think that's one of the questions, right? And should there be an objective that we're trying to achieve in this? What is that objective? Maybe you can bring some, clarity. What are we doing in Ukraine besides just being good Samaritans or humanitarians? I don't think that's the total. That's not the whole story.
That's right. And I think I'll start with just agreeing with elements of the premise of your question, which is, noting that the president said we're going to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Well, for somebody like me, when that falls on my ears, I know exactly what that means, right? Because I'm voting on the legislation. I'm deep in the weeds on this. I serve on the Intel committee. I was on the Foreign Affairs committee. And so I think that where we could do better, as a country or as elected officials, and I certainly try to do this as a representative, is just explain what that means a little bit more and explain why it's important. Because the idea of doing whatever it takes for as long as it takes, well, one, at the baseline, that's not wholly true because Ukrainians have asked for things along the way that we have not given them. So it's not always whatever it takes. But I think where it's important to look at the future is Ukraine is a country that was invaded by an authoritarian regime where the invading army committed war crimes, massacred civilians, and is trying to, take possession of an independent country. And the United States, as a defender of not just democracy, but democratic ideals, and a kind of beacon of hope related to what it is to be, a vibrant democracy, where, ebbs and flows. We don't always get it right, but we have been an example on the world stage as the world's oldest democracy of what that is and what it should be, and how to defend it. And the reality is that just as Russia wants to take possession of Ukraine and defeat their democracy, Russia is an adversary nation to the United States. Russia wants to see a world where the United States is diminished on the global stage. And they are doing a whole host of things across the board to try and, hurt our global standing and hurt our economy, etc. And so when we talk about the engagement of the United States, our support to the Ukrainians, which consists of, providing them with weapons systems, providing them with drones, providing them with ATACMS, facilitating the transfer, right? The Germans are going to push tanks to the Ukrainians, and so we're going to push tanks to the Germans, right? Facilitating a worldwide response in terms of sanctions against Ukraine, providing intelligence to the sanctions against Russia, providing communications and humanitarian and intelligence support to the Ukrainians. That is all with a couple purposes in mind. One, so that the basic principles of freedom and democracy that the Ukrainians are fighting for, that they are able to be successful, because they are the ones waging this war. And so it's an issue of principle, and it's an issue of military engagement. Two, if the Russians keep rolling on into Poland, or they decide to go into Finland, or they decide to go into any other NATO country, at that point in time, it's Article 5, and we are at war. So the investment in helping or ensuring that the Ukrainians can win this war is actually an investment in keeping, America's sons and daughters from going off to fight another war in Europe. And when we look at the totals, and to be very clear, we are spending a lot of money to support the Ukrainians. And frankly, some of that's going into our economy as we're, producing the things that we're sending to the Ukrainians. But as a percentage of our GDP, we are not even in the top 20 of countries who are supporting our Ukrainian allies. And I say that because sometimes, because we are the biggest and because our number is the largest and because we are the United States of America and we are leading the charge, I think sometimes it feels like we're there alone. And we're not. And that is also to our national security benefit that we be that leader on the global stage, bringing all of these countries together and telling them the same thing, which is this is to your national security benefit that the Ukrainians be able to defeat the Russians. And that's why we have to continue supporting them. We have to make smart choices. We have to give them what they need. And we have to be aggressive. And I think that we've done a lot of it right. In some places, we've been a little slower than I think that we should have been. But ultimately, it needs to continue. And it isn't. Certainly, we would have loved for this to be over by now. And certainly, the Ukrainians want it to be over by now. But while it is consistent with our values and effort in support of democracy, it is also in our absolute national security interests for us to be supporting the Ukrainians.
That's awesome. So I've got just for the benefit of time, I've got two really quick question. Actually, one's kind of like a question. The other one's more like a statement. I don't know. But so there's been some news reporting about you potentially considering a governmental run or a gubernatorial run in Virginia. So I wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to announce right now on our podcast to do so. I'll give you just a few seconds.
I appreciate the kind offer of a kind opportunity, but I am, really focused on supporting candidates who are on the ballot this November, and look forward to catching up with you after the November elections.
Okay, all right. So I'll put you down as a maybe. So my last question has to do with something I read about. When you were in the CIA, your mom didn't know what you're doing for a living. And my understanding that and also recognizing you're a mom, like, how do you reconcile that with your kids that may not necessarily be all that honest with you?
Oh, you took it to another level. It's funny. So when the big thing, so I was undercover for the entirety of my time with the agency. When I got out of the agency, you go through this whole process. They look at everything you ever handled. You have to get briefed out of things, and they may or may not ultimately declassify your employment. It took me about a year to go through this process, and they denied me a couple times, and I kept pushing. And so it's a long process. But when you first go in, if you go in undercover, the big discussion is always what it is to burden someone with the reality of where you work, right? Because it's a secret to keep, it's a worry to carry, and what's the purpose? What's the point? And so when I initially got my conditional offer of employment from the agency, it was before I got married to my husband. And so at that point in time, the only person I talked to about it was my father. And so I said, well, what do you think? I don't think I should tell mom. And he said, you don't have this job yet. No reason to even worry her. Yeah, we're not there yet. And by the time I actually got my start date, I had, I was married to my husband. And so at one point in time along the way, I said, hey, just so you know, I accepted this job. I'm not sure how long my background checks are going to take, but this is what I'm going to do when they call me. And I think my husband for a minute was like, yeah, okay, that sounds great. Sure. CIA is going to call. Okay, fine. On our 1 month anniversary, they're like, your start date's in 2 weeks. And so that was a very funny evening.
Oh
yeah.
My gosh.
And so then when I was at the agency, I was traveling, I was gone a lot, and then we moved overseas. And so, when I first started, I talked to my dad about it. I said, well, mom still doesn't know. And he's like, he doesn't need to know. Your mother's a worrier and she's a terrible liar. You're going to put her in an uncomfortable position, right? Where she likes to talk about her kids. Let her talk about the stuff she knows, even if none of it's true. And then what was funny is kind of at the point in time when I ultimately told her, right around the time that I was getting out of the agency, I said, I got to talk to you about this. This is what I really did. And I don't remember why I was having the conversation with her just one-on-one, but she gasped and goes, did your father know? And I said, yes. And she said, oh, good. Okay. And then she proceeded to tell me, I'm so glad you never told me. I wouldn't have been able to sleep for years. It's good that your father knew because somebody needed to know, but I couldn't have handled that secret. And I think she even said and what would I have said to my friends? I couldn't keep that secret. But the funny part was, also my in-laws, of course, didn't know. And so then when we said, hey, guess what? We're going to move back to Virginia. That's a surprise. Guess what? This is really where I worked. My mother-in-law was kind of a riot about it. But I think the best response when my employment was fully declassified is one of the women I had gone camping with as a Girl Scout leader. I was talking to her about it, and she made some funny comment. She said, now this explains the ropes courses. I got really aggressive on the ropes courses with the girls, but yeah.
That's so cool. Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you on here with us today, Congresswoman. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I have
thank you.
just one really small question. We have thousands of, listeners that come on. We're not Joe Rogan, but we have a pretty decent following here. What is kind of, just in a few just words, what do you want the people that listen to this show to hear from you about your heart and what's going on, at Congress? What would you want to say to them, the American people, as we're moving forward?
I want them to know that there are a lot of people who want to get things done. There are a lot of good people who believe in working together and finding common ground and, fiercely defending the ideas and the principles and the things they care about and advocating for them. But that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. There are a lot of people who want to run head-on at some of our country's biggest problems and challenges. There are a lot of people who want to hold themselves accountable and be highly responsive to the people that they represent. And so I think, I want people to believe in our country and believe in our democracy. And if you think it's not working, or if you're disappointed by things in it, then be part of changing that and demanding more, and holding your elected officials accountable. And, I would say, I think everyone's doing the first right step by listening to this podcast, because, nothing is simple. Everything is complicated. And anybody who promises you a simple answer or a simple solution is not being honest, right? There's any of the issues before us in the world are difficult ones. And some of them are difficult ones on an emotional level. Some of them are complex policy questions. But really being able to have detailed, earnest conversations and recognize that sometimes people come at life or at circumstances with, really different lived experiences that sometimes make it hard for them to see another perspective. But the more we lower the temperature, and care deeply about our principles and the things we're advocating for, but try to actually bring people, right? If you think you're right, try to convince people. If you think you're right, try to grow that trust. And you might find that you were 100% right. You might find you were only 70% right. And I think that if more people just tried to lower the temperature without sacrificing their intensity of beliefs and conviction, then I think we would be we would all get a little bit more sleep at night, I think.
That's good. Well, great answer. Thank you so much for being on the program today. It's been such a blessing. How can people keep up with what you're doing?
Yes. So if they
Congress
want to sign up, we have a newsletter. You can go to my website at spanberger.house.gov. You can sign up for the newsletter. We also are on social media at Rep Spanberger, or some iteration thereof. But if you go to spanberger.house.gov, you can get all the links to all the social media platforms that we're on. And we try to keep people informed there and let people know not just what I'm working on, but what's happening across the House and across the Congress and across the district.
So good. Well, again, everyone, this has been Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. Check out what's going on. Vote for her. And the next time she's coming up, 2024. Is it 2024?
Yes.
All right. So, and yeah, thank you guys for joining us. And until next time, we'll see you. Have a great one.
And tell your dad I said hello.
I will.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.